Welcome back to Music Theory 1. This is Chapter 10, Tones and Semitones. Recall the distribution of notes on the piano. We can see that between some of the white notes, most of them in fact, there is a black note. But between two of them, B and C, and E and F, two pairs I should say, there is only a semitone. We call this a semitone, this gap of no note between the closest two notes can be together is a semitone. And we might abbreviate that as ST or even S. Okay. Now, in all of the other examples of note gaps that we have here between white notes, these are all tones or whole tones because there is a note in between. And we might call that WT, T, or W. Any of these abbreviations, absolutely fine. The reason I'm giving you several is that if you're looking online at other videos, you might see others. And there are other examples of this, say between G and A, G sharp or A flat in the middle, another whole tone, which I'm going to use T in this video. Okay. And this is also the case between neighbouring black notes because there's a white note in between them. They are still considered to be whole tones. So if I just move this down a little bit, between these two notes, between D flat and E flat, or C sharp and D sharp, whichever of the N harmonics you want to call it, this is also a tone. Now, for a white note and its neighbouring black note, this is also a semitone. So we can see that the octave is made up of 12 unique notes, all a semitone apart. And the letter name scale, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, is made up of 7 distinct notes, an 8th one being the first one again, with a pattern of tones and semitones between them. We're going to be looking at that pattern in the next class. So it's very important that you remember the following. Letters without sharps and flats are all a tone apart except B to C and E to F, which are semitones. Otherwise, a note and its neighbour are semitones apart. Yeah, so all white, black pairs are semitones. If they're next door, obviously, if it's a bigger gap, they're not semitones. Except B to C sharp and E to F sharp, which are tones. watch out for enharmonics, which we mentioned in the last video. So G flat to F flat is a tone, and we can explore that by looking at those notes. So here's your G flat. Now F flat, you remember from last lesson, F flattened once ends up as F flat is the same as E, and this is a whole tone because there is a note in between the note, which is F natural. Okay, I think with that we are ready to have a go at the exercises, but I'll keep the piano keyboard here so that we can use it. I'll make it a little bit smaller, but there it is. This looks a bit small to me. Let's separate that out a little bit. Here in exercise 1, there we go. We're asked to look at these pairs of notes and draw the square bracket over any pairs that are semitones. So let's take a look. In our example, we've got B to C. There is no note in between B and C, so those are indeed a semitone pair. But if we look here in the second one going across, D to C, there is a note in between, D flat or C sharp, so this is not a semitone. That's a tone. If we look at these two notes, we've got a G and an A. And if we look back at that piano keyboard, we can see there is indeed a G sharp between G and A, or an A flat. So these are not a semitone apart, these are a tone apart. Looking down here, F sharp, now in bass clef, so watch out that we've changed to bass clef. Going into G, F sharp to G, no note in between, that is indeed a semitone. Looking here, we've got C sharp and D sharp, back into treble clef. There is D natural between those, so this is not a semitone, that is a whole tone. Looking at the second line, we're back to bass clef, we've got a D and a C. And if we look at the piano keyboard, we can see there is a D sharp, a D flat or a C sharp between them, so these are also a tone apart. Back into treble clef, we've got B flat and A, and we can see B flat and A are indeed neighbour notes with nothing in between, so they are indeed a semitone. G and G sharp back in bass clef. We can see there's no note between those two, so they are indeed a semitone. And G and A flat, notice that A flat is exactly the same note as G sharp. This was exactly the same as the one we just did. They are still a semitone away. And finally, middle C and bass clef down to B. They are indeed a semitone apart. There is no black note between B and C, so they are a semitone apart. And just so that we can hear those, maybe I can sing through those and you can hopefully hear the difference between a tone and a semitone. Just give me a second to prepare myself to do some singing for you. I know that it makes these videos even better, me warbling in the background. So in the example we have ti, do, and that is a semitone. Now, in the second one, the first one that we did, one after the example, D to C, re, do. Hopefully you can hear that the gap there was a lot bigger. That is not a semitone. G to A, sol, la. A nice big gap just like the previous one. That's a tone. F sharp to G sharp, fi, sol. Hopefully you can hear that that is closer together than the tone one was. That is a semitone. C sharp to D sharp, di, re. That's back to that bigger gap, the whole tone. Going on to the second line of examples, D to C, re, do. Hopefully you can hear that big gap for a whole tone. Next one, jumping back into the treble clef. I'm singing them at tenor pitch though, an octave lower. Te, la. Hopefully you can hear that semitone, that gap's a bit smaller than the previous one. Now, G to G sharp, so, si. Yeah, that is a semitone. You can hear that small gap. And you'll be able to hear that G to A flat is exactly the same, even though I'll say a different word for the A flat. Sol, la. Yeah, sol, la. That small gap. And then finally our C to B, do, tu, another semitone. Hopefully you heard all of those clearly as semitones. Let's move on to the next exercise. I'll keep the piano keyboard there to guide us. Let's see if we can do both exercises together. Okay, so we've got two good little exercises here. In each case, we need to add an accidental, which we studied in the last class, to the second note in order to make a semitone. And we want it to go a semitone up. So at the moment, in the example, they've given us a D and a D sharp. And they are indeed a semitone away. You can see that there are no notes between those on that piano keyboard. And they go like this. Re, re. You can hear that semitone. Now in the second example, because these notes are in the same bar, the accidental applies to both. So we've actually just seen the same note twice. Te, te. So we need to raise that second B flat up back to B natural to make it a tone higher. So we need to add a natural sign. Now we can sing te, ti. And we have our semitone relationship. Okay, do we need to add an accidental to the next one? We've got a B and a C. Ti, do. That is already a semitone, nothing needed. So we can give that a tick. As they say in the exercise, B to C is indeed a semitone already. The next one, back to bass clef, D and E. Ah. Re, mi. That's a tone, so we need to make the gap smaller and we have to alter the second note. That's what we've been told to do. So we need to make that second note one smaller. That would mean we flatten it. So D to E flat now, which is going to sound like this. Re, mi. Now we've got our semitone. Going on to the next line, E to F. That is already a semitone. There is no black note between E and F. Mi, fa. Hopefully you can hear that nice semitone there. The next one we've been given is F to G. Now that's a tone. It goes like this. Fa, sol. You can hear that bigger gap than last time. So we need to flatten that G down to bring it closer to the F to make it a semitone. That wasn't very good handwriting. Let's just do that a bit neater. Now we've got fa, sol. Yeah, There we go, a nice semitone. Now we're into bass clef again. Sol, La, G to A. So we want to flatten that A down to A flat, so that they are a semitone. Sol, La. Hear that semitone now. And now we've got C sharp to D. Now this is already a semitone. There's no black note between C sharp and D. There's no other note, white, black to white. D, Re. So there we are. We have made sure that all the notes go up by semitone. Exercise 3 asks us to do exactly the same thing, except this time the second note's got to be a semitone lower. So in the example, they've added a flat to the B to make B to B flat, which sounds like this. T, T. Very nice little semitone there. In the treble clef now, for our first one to do ourselves, we've got G currently going to F. That sounds like this. So, fa. That's a tone. So we need to sharpen the F to bring it closer to the G so that it is only a semitone lower than the G rather than a tone lower. So, fi. So that we now have G to F sharp as a semitone. F to E. Now F to E is already a semitone because there's no black note between F and E. Fa, mi. Already a semitone, so we give it a tick. E flat to D. Is there a note between those two? No, there isn't. So we just have me, re. Already a semitone. Now, C sharp to, this would be counted as another C sharp because the accidental applies to the whole bar. D, D, two of the same note, that's no good. To make it a semitone lower, we need to get that C to move down, so we need to naturalize it. We need to bring the C sharp back to C natural. There we go. Back into bass clef, C to B. Do, ti. That is a semitone already. So we're good. F sharp to E. Fi, mi. Hopefully you can now hear, your ears have adjusted to hearing so tones and semitones really, really clearly. You should hear that that's a full tone because there is an F in the middle. So we need to sharpen up that E, and remember that E sharp is the same as F natural. That is our enharmonic equivalent from last time. Yeah, E sharp is the same as F natural, one up from E. So F sharp and E sharp, semitone away from each other. And in our final example, we've got what look like two A's on their own. La, la. Me falsettoing it there in a pitch. We need to flatten the second one so that it is a semitone lower, so that it is one semitone below the first note. La, la. Singing in tenor pitch again there, just to save your ears. Right, that is it for our first lesson involving tones and semitones. They are going to make a reappearance in the next video when we learn about scales and key signatures of the first 4 major keys that you're going to learn. See you next time.